everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm actually really lucky to be talking to two people, Jonathan English and Uday Schultz, who wrote a really awesome fair report at the Toronto Regional Board of Trade on how to integrate and bring together Toronto's fairs to basically improve both the accessibility and the functionality of our transit network. We're going to be talking about kind of the details of the report, what drove it, some of the things they learned, and yeah, so without further ado, so Jonathan, can you give us a short background on yourself?
Hi, so thanks for having me on here, and it's a real pleasure. I'm the Director of Policy for Transportation and Infrastructure at the Toronto Region Board of Trade. So we're working on a bunch of reports on various issues around transportation in the region, and this is the first of them. So I'm very excited to talk about it. In terms of my background, I did a doctorate in urban planning at Columbia in New York, and I actually studied places in suburban areas where we'd managed to achieve high transit ridership, and Toronto is one of these areas that I've focused on in particular. So I kind of look at things from a bit of a historical perspective. Otherwise, my Twitter is English Rail if you want to read more of this stuff. And thanks again.
Awesome. Okay, Uday, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, so I'm Uday Schultz. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm helping out with the development of these reports on transit issues in the Toronto region. Really excited to be here today talking with you, Reece. I am actually a college student currently, that's my primary occupation. I'm at Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm studying history there. I'm currently a sophomore. I am quite fascinated by transit issues both in Toronto and elsewhere. I'm from the States, from New York, and I certainly comment on them a lot on Twitter. So I'm at A320LGA if you're interested in reading some more.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So, Jonathan, why is it that we need integrated fares? What about the existing system in Toronto isn't working?
So when you're traveling around the region in a car, you really wouldn't know that you're crossing from one city to another if you didn't look at the sign at the side of the road. But if you're riding transit, municipal boundaries can be a huge barrier. There's a lot of historical reasons for this. As the region has grown, there have been a number of different transit systems set up in the various municipalities that now make up the Greater Toronto, Hamilton, and surrounding area. But what we need to do is create an integrated transit system that's as integrated as the economic region and the social region that we have today. You know, right now you can get on a bus or on the subway at Yonge and Sheppard and go downtown to King and Bay on the TTC for $3.25. Now that's a 15-kilometer trip. So that's 22 cents a kilometer. But if you go only 4 kilometers north to Thornhill, you're going to pay $7.13 to ride TTC and YRT. Less than a third of the distance, more than twice the fare. Now, who is hit hardest by this? They're the people that live in the disproportionately marginalized communities on the outer edges of the city of Toronto. There are a lot of jobs in places like Vaughan. But if you happen to live in Rexdale and want to take a job at, for example, a distribution center in Vaughan, you're going to pay $7.13 each way. You're going to pay more than an hour's work at minimum wage for a round-trip commute of only a few kilometers. Now that's inequitable, and it's also inefficient. It reduces the talent pool that employers have access to, particularly outside the city of Toronto, and it reduces the opportunities available to people, especially those who live near a municipal boundary. You know, that doesn't make sense. Then there's another issue that we face, and that is that we have this great interregional transit system called GO Transit with an amazing infrastructure of rail corridors that go all over the region. But the problem is that they're underused because really the vast majority of people that ride GO trains today, you know, they get there by car, they park at the station. In the 905 region, some do take the bus, but the model is very focused on getting people to downtown Toronto. Now that's a very important market that GO does an amazing job of serving, but that's not anywhere near the majority of trips in the region. people are going all over the place, and we need a transit system that responds to that. In the COVID era, that's especially true because, well, we don't know exactly what's going to be the future of the financial district, at least in the short to medium term. So let's take an example. For one, the Steeles East bus is one of the busiest bus routes in the city of Toronto, and actually one of the busier bus routes in North America. It runs to Finch Station on the Yonge subway. Now, the Yonge subway, as we know, on Line 1, is very overcrowded, and we're spending billions of dollars to decongest that route, whether it's through the Ontario line or reconstruction of Yonge and Bloor Station or re-signaling the line. And 5,500 people every day take the Steeles East bus to Finch Station to get on the subway. Now, a lot of those people, not all, but a lot of those people could save as much as 80 minutes a day on a round trip if they were going downtown by switching instead to the Stouffville GO line at Milliken Station. The bus runs right past it. Now, obviously, that line doesn't have nearly as much service as the subway does, so that's a big part of the problem. But another big part of the problem is that you're going to pay $10.87 instead of $3.25 if you take that route. And like I mentioned, 5,500 people a day take the bus to the subway. Fewer than 50 a day take the bus to the GO train. So this is a big problem with GO talking about expanding its service in the midday. Adding a lot of new trips so that GO can serve more of that anywhere to anywhere, anytime market. But the big issue is that traditionally, GO parking lots have filled up at 7, 8 a.m. So if you're trying to catch a train at 11, you really can't park and ride. There's nowhere to park. We need a different way to get people to the stations. The only viable way to do it is the same way that most people get to suburban TTC subway stations, and that is by bus, by embedding GO Transit into the local transit network so that it's just as intuitive and seamless and costless to take the bus to the GO train as it is to take the bus to the subway. This is going to massively shorten travel times for a lot of people. Again, especially those disproportionately marginalized communities out on the outer edges of the city of Toronto. It's also going to make much, much better use of the billions of dollars we're spending on expanding the GO network. So to sum it up, there are really two reasons why we need to fix this problem, and the time to do it is now. We need to fix it because the TTC, and York Region and other transit agencies charge punitive fares if you happen to be crossing a municipal boundary, because there's no discount, especially between Toronto and the 905. And we need to integrate GO into the broader local transit system and make it a seamlessly integrated part of the local transit network.
Okay, so another question to you, Jonathan. How did you guys go about solving the problem you just described to us?
So basically, in the big picture, we had to come up with a way that resolved the integration problem without eliminating the local autonomy, which has been a sticking point in these kinds of discussions for a really, really long time. Basically, people don't want to give up local control of their transit system. That's especially true in the city of Toronto. Nobody wants to have to deal with the upheaval right now that would be required to completely change the transit system into, say, a single agency or something like that. So we had to come up with an alternative. And the model we looked at was the Verkehrsverbünde, which exist in many German-speaking cities. What it is, to put it more or less simply, is a bit of a co-op. So the different transit agencies, they stay independent. The workers still work for those agencies. They're still under control of, say, their own municipalities. But they cooperate on the key things that are essential for integration. They cooperate on, first and foremost, fare policy and revenue allocation. You got to get the money part right before you can do anything else. They coordinate on scheduling and planning. So at the micro level, that's about making sure that the schedule changes happen at the same time so that agencies aren't scrambling to maintain time connections. And then on more the macro scale, planning big capital projects, route design, that kind of thing. And the third is public information. We need to create a bit of a one-stop shop where people can go and get transit information. Now, we've made progress in all of these areas already. But the idea of a transit federation is to turbocharge this and create a permanent but equal institution that can accomplish these three key areas of integration while maintaining the local autonomy that is so important to a lot of transit riders. So, as we were trying to develop this plan, we had a couple guiding principles in mind. Firstly, mode neutrality. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you shouldn't pay a different fare, whether you're riding a bus, a subway, streetcar, LRT, train, you name it. If it's a mode of transit, it should be covered under the same fare. Now, why do we say that? Well, it's because transit is a network. You need to often use different modes of transit to get from point A to point B. You might be taking the bus to the subway to the streetcar. And you shouldn't have to pay an extra fare just because you happen to be riding a vehicle that looks different. Secondly, and equally importantly, poorer people shouldn't be relegated to slower modes. We don't want a situation where people pay a different fare for the bus and the subway, a situation where the investment banker working in the financial district can speed downtown on the subway, but the person who cleans the building, a essential worker, is relegated to some 2-hour bus ride because they can't afford a premium subway fare. And finally, a transfer is an inconvenience. You shouldn't have to pay more for something that's inconvenient. The second principle was boundary invisibility. So a rider making a trip of a similar distance shouldn't pay more than another rider just because they happen to be crossing a boundary, whether municipal or transit agency. The third one, and the first two issues speak to this, but we also wanted to look at it more broadly, is equity. So fundamentally, people shouldn't be denied access to jobs or services because they can't afford a transit fare. And we need a transit fare policy that addresses that. And finally, legibility. A transit system should be easy to use and understand, and that should be true even for people who've never ridden it before. So those are the things that really shape the proposal that we created. And we think that a federation is the best model, or the most realistic model, to implement both the fare and the service integration that the region needs on a fairly short time scale.
So I'm getting the impression that you guys kind of looked at various systems to influence your decisions and how you structured the fare report and your proposal for integrating fares in Toronto. So maybe, Uday, you can explain what systems did you guys look at to kind of gain inspiration?
Yeah, so with those 4 principles that Jonathan laid out in mind, we really looked across the world for agencies we thought were doing particularly good jobs or particularly interesting things with transit fares and fare integration. So I think our greatest inspiration probably came from Germany. Berlin and Munich especially have really interesting integrated fare systems and are the home of this Verkehrsverbund model for sort of this transit federation that both allows for regional integration and a lot of these accessibility benefits while also preserving the autonomy of local operators. And we thought that was certainly an applicable model for Toronto, so we took that. There are other systems, however, that also inspired our thinking, some in good ways and some in ways where we thought we should avoid some of the pitfalls that those systems ran into. So our fare zone structure, which is gridded rather than radial. So you have a municipality being its own fare zone rather than having fare zones sort of radiating concentrically up from downtown Toronto. That was something that we took from Zurich, which has a, sort of like Toronto, a region of fares rather than sort of a simple sort of center and outwards fare system. In terms of our thinking on social fares, we looked quite closely at what has been going on in Paris with some of their social fare schemes. We think that's really powerful. and something that certainly is enabled by the Federation framework, which allows for a lot of flexibility in how you attach and modify some of these other fare items into your broader framework. In terms of things that we didn't like, I think to Jonathan's earlier points about sort of thinking of transit as a network rather than as individual lines and services, we were definitely cautioned by the tale of London. So in London, if you do not have a monthly pass, you have to pay to transfer between trains and buses. And insofar as in Toronto, these rail bus transfers are critically important for the functioning of the subway and for the future ridership, ridership projections and ridership sort of growth on Go Transit, we thought, again, it's just absolutely critical that we avoid some of those mistakes and avoid that sort of punitive system that forces people taking trips not perfectly served by the paths route takes, to avoid that pitfall and make sure that there's that mode neutrality and that sort of universal accessibility associated with the fare system. So, to putting that all together, we ended up with this Transit Federation model from Germany, the sort of gridded fare system from Zurich, and then some thinking about social fares from Paris. And some cautionary tales from London. We put that together, and that was sort of what sort of set out the basic framework for what we wanted to do in Toronto.
Okay, so Jonathan, I kind of heard what Uday said about London, and you guys are trying to take examples and avoid pitfalls. London has, as a lot of people know, a zone fare system. Why do we need zones in Toronto? I know they're really criticized in a lot of ways in London. Why wouldn't we just have a flat regional fare?
Well, so what's interesting is that the city of Toronto once had zones, and in 1973 there was a decision made to eliminate zones within the city of Toronto. And one of the reasons that decision was made was that it was kind of the same punitive fare structure that we have now crossing into Mississauga or into York Region or Durham, where you were paying virtually a double fare just because you happened to cross the street. We don't think that approach makes sense. What we've proposed is a double zone base fare. So you get to go 2 zones for the minimum fare. So that means you don't end up in one of these situations where you happen to be crossing a boundary and you pay way more. But at some point, there have to be some boundaries that mean that you have to pay a little bit more, because frankly, if we had a flat fare covering the entire region, how would you even define the region? Would you go all the way to Hamilton? Would you go all the way to Kitchener-Waterloo or Barrie or Peterborough? How can we have a fare structure where a person going from Peterborough or Hamilton to downtown Toronto pays the exact same fare as someone going a very short distance, within Brampton or within Durham Region or within the city of Toronto? You'll end up in a situation where those people that depend on transit for all of their trips, that don't own a car, are subsidizing, in effect, the people doing those kind of long haul work commutes, who are disproportionately more affluent. So we needed a fare structure that kind of squared the circle of maintaining that flat fare within the city of Toronto, while simultaneously not really gutting the fare revenues of Go Transit. And we've kind of done that. So within the city of Toronto, we retain the flat fare. Uday can maybe talk a bit more about that in a bit. But when you're going longer distance, and we're actually kind of amazed by how well the numbers worked out on this, you can travel from, say, Burlington to Toronto or Oakville to Toronto, Union Station on Go, and you end up paying roughly the same fare that you do today, except that you get free transfers to the buses or the subway on either end. So the idea is to make sure that those full-time transit users aren't subsidizing the long-haul commuters, while simultaneously not creating a true fare by distance structure where we end up in a situation where people who have to take somewhat longer transit trips are paying much more than they do today.
Okay, so I kind of heard what Jonathan said there regarding needing zones because of distance and stuff. Maybe Uday can answer this. How would fares work in the city of Toronto itself? Would people have to pay more money to go further within Toronto? People going downtown to Scarborough, downtown to Etobicoke, etc.
Yeah, so fares in Toronto would not change.
Okay.
One thing we actually adopted from Berlin was this idea of a two-zone base fare. So Toronto is two zones on our map, but the base fare you pay, sort of your basic, transit pass or basic single ride, covers travel in two zones. So you buy a ticket in outer Toronto in, I don't know, Rexdale or something, and you can travel downtown for $3.25 like you always could have. The change we're implementing is that you can also buy a cheap fare that will take you into Mississauga or Brampton easily in outer Toronto. So essentially, we're just adding a second option. For those who wish to travel within the city of Toronto, there's again no change. But we're making it possible so that those who want to travel across the boundaries, want to take a job somewhere within the 905, are not penalized for that decision and are treated similarly to those traveling just within the city.
And to top it off, if you live within the city of Toronto, you'll now be able to use, in our proposal, GO Transit as easily as you do the bus or subway or streetcar. So let's say, you live somewhere just, in the northern bit of Weston. You could take the Weston bus, rather than taking it all the way down to the Bloor subway. You could take it to Weston Station and hop on GO or Up Express and go downtown in a tiny fraction of the time, because Western Road is very congested at rush hour. So this is really an amazing bonus for residents of the city of Toronto. The same thing is true if you live in Mimico or Long Branch. You can now take the bus to the GO train or in Scarborough as well. So as GO adds more and more service, the value of that service is maximized, and the benefit from that service to Torontonians is maximized.
Absolutely, and just to reiterate an earlier point, that's bringing GO into the network within Toronto again has really positive implications for the state of the subway, decongesting the young subway in Toronto and making it possible for riders in outer Toronto to use other routes downtown or other parts of the city will really help with some of the TTC's capacity issues and help build a more resilient and sustainable and flexible network for city residents and for those beyond.
Okay, so with the proposal kind of out there, and I think we've discussed it a fair bit, I have some questions. So the first question kind of regards how do we think we need to change the way, especially kind of local bus routes, are organized in our various cities to kind of take advantage of that new fare structure? And then the second point, if you guys can maybe answer, is how does that fare by distance or kind of limited fare by distance work if we don't currently have do we have to do a tap off? How does that work? So maybe you guys can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, so towards the first point, we really see fare integration as just the start of a much larger rethinking of the Toronto Region's transit network. We're very aware of some of the service design and service level limitations on these cross-boundary trips and on transfers and various multiple route trips that are imposed by these other problems within the region. And we're really looking forward to speaking that in some of the upcoming reports that we're going to do on regional rail and suburban transit. We think that though fares make it possible to transfer between modes, it's people are not going to transfer from a very frequent bus to a once per hour GO line if the alternative is going to the subway a few more stops down the road, which comes every 5 minutes. So insofar as we really want to realize the benefits of this integration, I think making sure that these network design and service level issues are resolved alongside the fare problems is going to be critical. And I think Jonathan can speak to a few examples of areas where we believe there are big changes to be made and really sort of big benefits to be realized in restructuring both local bus routes and the ways bus routes interact with rail routes in the region, or the like.
Yeah, so there are a lot of really good examples of places where better integration can make service run more efficiently and work better for passengers. Firstly, you can look at City of Toronto boundary issues. There are a number of examples where bus routes sort of turn around when they hit Steeles Avenue or Etobicoke Creek, and that's inconvenient for a lot of riders because they're forced to make a transfer that they wouldn't otherwise have to make, and that's something that could be addressed. Between the 905 systems, there has already been better cooperation and better integration. You look at the cooperation between Brampton and YRT, between Brampton and Mississauga. These are some, Burlington and Hamilton Street Railway. These are some excellent examples of cooperation. But they still tend to focus on a few different routes. And while you can use your transfer, on say Mississauga and Brampton Transit, you can't buy a pass, for example, that would allow you to make a cross-boundary trip between Mississauga and Brampton, unless you happen to be on a specific route. And you have to decide which bus to get on based on what pass you have. So all of these kinds of things add a complexity. They add inefficiency, and they just generally make transit less attractive to people than the car. So that kind of integration is a great way to solving these problems. So, I think one of the things that we had to think about is in order to introduce this kind of new fare structure, are there technical changes that we would actually need to make to the existing transit system? And what we realized was that they weren't that big, but there were some. The most important change, really the only major change, is that we would introduce a universal tap off. Now that might seem a bit scary at first, because it's a change. But the reality is that a lot of people already do tap off on the system, on Go Transit, for example. And we think that a lot of the confusion around tap off is that sometimes you tap off and sometimes you don't. If everyone knew that, when they got on the bus, they tap on, and when they get off the bus, they tap off, it would be much less confusing. So in terms of the infrastructure that would need to be added, it's really not that much. Most buses in the region already have Presto readers at the back of the bus, the rear door. The subway station turnstiles can be adapted pretty easily for tap off as well as tap on. And of course, at the busiest TTC subway bus interchanges, they have bus terminals so that you don't have to cross any fare gates at all. So the tap off isn't an issue there. And that actually brings us to the reason why we needed to do the tap off. So really, there's only three ways to integrate transit fares across the region. One way is to provide a flat fare across the whole region. For the reasons that we explained, the fact that it is just inequitable to ask someone going, from Parkdale to Dufferin, from Dufferin Avenue and Parkdale to downtown to go to a doctor's appointment, to pay the same fare as someone going from Burlington to downtown. So if that's not on the table, then the second option is to have a separate fare structure for buses, where buses, for example, have a flat fare, and a zone fare system or a fare by distance system only exists on the subway and potentially on Go trains as well. Well, the problem with that is, firstly, that you're creating this inequity where you're effectively paying a premium for one mode and potentially adding a transfer fare. But more importantly, it would also mean rebuilding every single TTC subway station with a bus terminal to introduce fare gates between the bus terminal and the subway platform. So you're creating a big new choke point in a lot of very busy subway stations and adding a lot of inconvenience for riders, not to mention spending a whole pile of money on rebuilding stations. So that led us to the only other alternative, which is a universal tap-off function, so that the system knows where you got on and where you got off, whether you're taking the bus, the streetcar, the subway, whatever. The infrastructure is already there. It's simply a matter of public education, and we think the public is smart enough to understand tap on, tap off when you ride transit. So this just seemed to be the simplest, cleanest, easiest, and quickest to implement solution to the problem of creating a regional rather than a fragmented fare structure.
Okay, so I think you guys have made like a really compelling case for your idea of how to integrate fares in Toronto, and that's great and all. It's great to have integrated fares, but when you try to propose that, the question is going to be, how much does it cost? So can you guys kind of walk us through how much would your proposal cost? And what are the benefits too? Like, what are the cost benefits?
So modeling this is something that is really tricky, because this kind of dramatic change across the region is going to have unforeseen effects, especially in the medium to long term. And, we would argue likely very positive effects. But, we did try to come up with a cost that kind of gives people a ballpark idea of what this is going to cost, so that, they know, to some extent, as a worst case scenario, the foregone revenue from this. So the figure we came up with, and again, I will say this is a worst case scenario that is based on pre-COVID ridership numbers, is $165 million a year. I say this as a worst case scenario because, of course, it's foregone revenue, but based on a much higher revenue base. You're foregoing far less revenue now because the revenue doesn't exist to forego, because the riders aren't on the buses or trains. But we would argue that this $165 million a year amount is affordable in the context of what we're spending on transit. It's affordable in the context of the billions, the tens of billions that we're spending on capital projects, when this fare structure and integrated service is what will unlock the maximum value of those capital investments. It's also worth it just in the context of what we're spending on transit today. When you look at the TTC and Metrolinx subsidies have gone up by more than that year to year, never mind overall. So so this isn't a crazy figure. And what's more, now is the time to do it. You might say, well, we're already spending so much on transit now, how can we spend even more? But the reality is that what we need to do for transit is get people back on the trains and buses. That's far more important right now than than nickel and diming people to try and maximize fare revenue, to put it bluntly. We have right now a lot of excess capacity on the transit system, and we don't know when those riders are going to come back. We need a fare structure. We need a way to entice those people back, entice those people to leave all those new cars they've bought in the driveway and get on the bus and get on the train. So this is exactly the time when we can use the support that's being given for transit, not just as a life support system, but as that life-saving surgery that really buys you decades more of life. So now's the time. And if you want to go into some of the details on how we came up with that figure, and also who might be responsible for that amount, I should say the majority of that would accrue to Go. So the smaller chunks of that are the elimination of the co-fare between Go and the 905 system. So right now, if you switch from bus to Go train in the 905, you pay between 80 cents and $1. But Go actually kicks the rest of your fare over to the transit agency to make them whole. So they're getting the full fare, whatever that local agency charges. So what we're saying is basically just reduce it from 80 cents to zero, following more or less the same structure as today. And that would cost about $11 million a year. Now, on the TTC, there was a co-fare of $1.50. I think most people watching this will remember. That was eliminated a little while ago. But we're able to use the cost of that $1.50 co-fare to extrapolate what the cost of a $0 co-fare would be. Again, of course, based on pre-COVID numbers. And that would be around $45 million. Then, in order to fit Go within the structure that we've seen, some Go fares would come down. So, some would stay more or less where they are now, but others, because of the nature of the system, would come down a bit. And the average reduction on the busiest Go routes was around 12%. So that's the biggest ticket amount of about $75 million. But we argue that this is essential to make Go more of an integrated service. And I would also add, what this allows Go to do is unlock all of their huge land resources around their stations. If most people are coming into the station by bus instead of park and ride, Go can redevelop all of those lands and really make back all of the money or much more of the money. And also the increased ridership, especially at a time when Go has excess capacity, may well make up for a substantial part, maybe even all of that amount. And then the other benefit that pays back some of this amount, would reduce some of this amount, is that you sweat your asset more, so to speak. A bus that drops off a lot of its passengers at, if that Steeles East bus drops off a lot of its passengers at Milliken Go, then it's mostly empty and can pick up a whole bunch more passengers on the way to Finch Station. So the same bus can move a lot more riders, collecting more revenue. So you're making, rather than having the bus start empty and gradually fill up all the way to Yonge Street, you have more turnover. So that's another great way to maximize the value of that. So the last way we calculated this was, and this is the one that was the trickiest. We based it on transportation moral survey data, but this one is maybe the rougher estimate. But it's about $34 million for the reduction in cross-boundary fares between the 905 and the TTC. So already the 905 agencies, as we mentioned, cross-recognize transfers, not passes. So there would be a little bit of a revenue effect there, but not a huge one from 905 to 905 systems. From 905 to 416, of course, there would be a revenue hit on those cross-boundary trips. Although, again, a lot of those buses, start at Steeles relatively empty and go downtown and fill up. If they were busier on that cross-boundary leg, again, you're using your asset a little more effectively. So that's somewhere where additional revenue might cover part of that cost. But really, that 34 million of 165 million is the only part that would in any way accrue to municipalities. The province, through Go Transit, would really be responsible for the rest of that picture. Obviously, the province has more financial resources right now. And for that remaining 34, again, based on pre-COVID figures, forgotten revenue, the province could participate in supporting the municipal agencies, since obviously this is an intermunicipal matter of regional significance that would make it appropriate for provincial support and investment.
Okay, so thank you so much, guys, for coming on and talking about your proposal. I think it's really quite good and fantastic in terms of bringing together all the different agencies. I think it would have a lot of value transportation-wise. So maybe if you guys just want to say a few parting things.
Well, yeah, I'm really excited to be back with you, hopefully, for our next 3 reports. Uday and I are working on 3 more reports in this series. The next one's going to be looking at regional rail. The potential value of regional rail for the region, which I think isn't completely appreciated, broadly speaking. The potential value is tremendous, but also looking at kind of global best practices, for lack of a better term, in implementing regional rail. Then the next one after that is going to be on infrastructure construction. So looking at some of the challenges that Ontario has faced in building big infrastructure projects, particularly in terms of cost. The cost of at the board's transportation summit, we had someone from Madrid Metro, which is quite famous for building very, very cheaply and quickly subways. And he said that they're building subways at $70 million a kilometer thereabouts right now. And we build subways at 750 plus. In some cases $1 billion plus a kilometer for a subway. So if we could, there are differences, of course, but there are likely some lessons that we can draw from Madrid, from other places, from successful examples here in the Toronto region and in Canada, for ways to expedite construction and also to make it more cost effective, so we get more transit for the money we have to spend. And then the last one, but certainly not least in my heart, is local transit, particularly suburban local transit. So looking at places that have been successful at attracting riders in places that aren't kind of conventionally considered the most transit supportive. So we're really looking forward to that, and hopefully you'll have us on to talk about all of them.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, we certainly hope to be back. And we're really trying again to paint sort of a complete and cohesive picture of some transit improvements for the region that we think, especially in all together, sort of put together as a cohesive set of policies, can really have a big impact.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. Thank you so much, guys, for coming on. Again, if you're not already, go follow both of these guys on Twitter. We've got @EnglishRail. He's up over here. And then we have A320LGA. He talks about transit stuff, though, over here. Great guys to follow on transit Twitter. Thanks for watching the video, guys, and I will see you in the next one.